I have
Oh
to make
yeah.
sure that every strand is perfectly in place. Are the lights,
Oh,
you know,
indeed.
and
Because Zoom video quality is going to capture everything. Hello, Philip. Hello, hello.
hello, David.
it's always it's always so weird with these introductions because we talk before we start recording, but then I have to have some sort of introductory bit in the video, you know. So
Sounds good.
so I'll just do a little bit of an introduction for you. This is Philip, and he played the shamisen on my song Austin. That's going to be on Pictures at an Inhibition, my album that's coming out on April 30th. You like that wordplay?
I do. It's, tickles my tasteful little heart,
Oh, good, good. I think we have a similar aesthetic when it comes to
Oh,
wordplay.
yes. Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
So talk to me a little bit about how that process was for you. I kind of gather the whole recording at home thing, like for many people, it was rather new.
Yeah. I think for myself, the first challenge was actually working in a purely Western medium again on a Japanese instrument.
Mm.
It's not that I haven't done it before, but most of what I like to do, and when I do my own concerts, the repertoire is entirely classical, as in pre-modern, and the
Mm.
musicianship skills are quite different. And some of the, well, as you mentioned, I think you said some of the pitches were not quite Western.
Sure.
And I was trying to think, well, which one did I get off? It must have been some of the minor seconds were a bit flat, something like that. Then some of the rhythmic constructions that you had are quite unlike anything you have in the sort of music I do.
Mm.
And then other smaller things, for example, this tempo at which the piece was to go.
Mm.
And the type of shamisen I play, how can I explain this? In the world of shamisen, there are over 10 different types.
Mm.
And the type I play is associated with sort of the intellectual elite, the
Okay.
intellectual bourgeoisie, those people who had money and the leisure to pursue music that was, I believe, was specifically designed and marketed to the cultural elite.
Mm.
Commoners, yes, I mean, they were not part of the aristocracy or military classes, but
Mm.
what I think you could say is the bourgeoisie, but you have to be careful on how you use that word.
Sure.
So technique, the sort of technique that you need to play that sort of piece at that tempo is not easy. The
Sure.
plectrum is really, it's quite large,
Mm.
which makes passage work of a certain sort quite difficult.
Gotcha.
The other types of shamisen that are associated with theatrical genres, the plectrum is smaller, and talk about power chords. Yeah, they're good. They can play.
You have a little bit more kind of you kind of have a little bit more agility with a smaller plectrum.
Yeah, you do. With the plectrum, there's down, up, down, up, down, up is quite common.
Mm.
And the smaller the plectrum is, the faster you can do it. The type that we use in the sort of shamisen I do is about, what is that, 8 inches or
Wow.
so? Yeah,
Mm.
it's quite wide, and you can't, there's some things you just simply can't do.
Well, I have to say, I think you rose to the challenge quite well. I think. Have you heard the finished product?
Yeah. I did. It's like, oh wow,
Yeah.
he fixed it.
Like you were saying, it took a little bit of tweaking to kind of meld it into the texture. I remember us talking specifically about how with the shamisen you playing in tempo is not so highly regarded. And so trying to line up your part with the other parts, I mean, thankfully with the miracles of modern technology, we're able to line up all those attacks so that it lines up metrically with everything else that's going on. So that worked out really well. But also, I'm going back to something you said. I remember when I was kind of learning about Japanese instruments when I was in Japan. That was almost 6 years ago now.
Oh my god. Yeah.
I remember learning that the koto was an instrument that was kind of more associated with the courts, the elites, and that shamisen, especially at first, was more kind of low down commoners, roadside shows, and geisha kind of things. But so I was interested to hear that the shamisen you play is kind of in between those two strata.
Yeah, and what makes it sort of sit between the two, sorry, we're going to be joined by a very important member of the household here.
Oh, cute.
Yes, this is Kinako. One of his things is it's time for the morning snuggle. Anyway, the shamisen I play is actually commonly performed in an ensemble format with the koto.
Oh, okay.
And the koto for the Edo period commoner would have been, I think the closest analogy I can come up with is sort of like the piano would have been for the 19th century European.
Mm.
It reflects that, all right, you've got a certain amount of money, you've got a certain amount of leisure, that you're educated.
Mm.
Snob appeal. I mean, and the instrument is unquestionably associated with the aristocracy and the Buddhist clergy.
Mm.
And just that alone, and the music that had once been played on the instrument held that snob appeal. When the shamisen entered the country, the first people to pick this instrument up were blind males who
Mm.
were associated with a narrative genre. And this would have been in the late 16th century. And the scale that they used probably did not have any minor seconds. At least that's the assumption.
Mm.
Re, mi, so, la, ti, re. Sorry, I might get Japanese there. Then about 30, 40 years later, the same group of musicians managed to start playing the koto. And up until that point, there had been some restrictions on as to who could play the koto.
Oh, I see.
Um, with the Buddhist clergy, women were not supposed to perform, and neither were blind men.
Oh, wow.
But clearly, this changed.
Mm.
And when they did this, it's assumed that within 30, 40 years, they began to manipulate the scale. And the scale had or has minor seconds. I mean, if you use solfege, the scale is mi, fa, la, ti, do, mi, do, ti, la, fa, mi.
Mm.
And this was, at the time, seen as erotic. Yeah, I mean, there's some commentaries by Confucian scholars, and the Confucian scholars were, they were about as much fun as Lutherans.
Sure. There may be some Lutherans watching this.
Oh, my apologies to the Lutherans.
Catholics, let's say.
Okay, well, I'm Catholic, so I can do this.
There you go.
I mean, it sounded like they were describing sort of musical porn.
Mm-hmm.
That it was so offensive. It was shocking.
Yeah.
Of course, that was what made it really popular.
Of course, that's how it goes. As soon as the church speaks out against it, everyone's gonna go for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And at any rate, it sort of became fused, this music, this new genre that they created became fused with the poetics of court culture.
Mm.
And so everything is very elegant, very, very elegant. You don't have crude pornography. It's quite subdued, it's veiled, but abundantly clear to those who know where to look. The lyrics that are used in many of these pieces are such that if you understand them in their entirety, it means that you've got a good education. I mean, it requires knowledge,
Sure.
if that makes any sense. And so that appeal, the snob appeal of the instrument alone, but sort of this edgy bit to it through the implied sensuality of the scale is what made it exciting. For example, in this genre that I do, musical drama, if you will, doesn't exist. You have texts that are taken from no plays that are ostensibly terrifying.
Mm.
But in this genre, it's not, it cannot be. And there was a very famous poet, late Heian, early Kamakura period poet, who said, yes, you can have terrifying things in poetry, but before it's terrifying, it must be elegant.
Mm.
So you have this, it's not the immediacy of, say, Carmen.
Sure.
I mean, think of, the last bit where, she gets knocked off, if you will. As that sort of drama does not exist.
Interesting.
the emotional ups and downs that you would associate with musical drama don't exist. You get that in the kabuki theater. I mean, you have murder, you have incest, you have all sorts
So
of.
dramatic.
Who was it that said, it's you can do anything on stage as long as you sing it?
That does
Kabuki's
seem to be true.
you said anything goes as long as it's musical.
Yeah.
And kabuki's like that. You can have some really, really fantastic stories, and it's dramatic, it's
Yeah.
exciting, it's thrilling, and it's meant to, some of the ghost stories are meant to terrify you, and they do.
Yeah. When I met you in Kyoto, I think I had just come from seeing my first kabuki play in person.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was like it was so funny because it started at 11 a.m. and I thought that is a strange time to have a theatrical performance. There were going to be 3 plays, and I think I had a large breakfast because I was like, well, the time from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. I'm usually going to want to eat something.
Mm.
But my understanding was that you go to a performance, you're in a theater, you're not eating anything. And so I sit down and I wind up sitting next to a woman from the Netherlands.
Oh wow!
And so we're kind of hitting it off. It's like, you speak English, I speak English. Let's have a little chat. And we watched the first play, and then the curtain comes down, and then everyone takes out their bento boxes. Everyone takes out their sushi rolls and things and bags of spiced nuts. I'm like looking all over the place. And some very nice women nearby saw that I was going hungry and like gave me some nuts and gave me some things. And I was like, oishi, oishi. Oh, yeah, no. Trying to be as grateful as possible. But it was funny how I got in contact with you because I was staying. It's great. It's crazy how things work out sometimes. I was staying with the family of one of my mom's former foreign exchange students named Sana.
Oh wow!
So Sana and her daughters were visiting her mother who lives in Kyoto, and I was coming to study with a composer named Carlo Forlivesi, an Italian composer who works a lot with traditional Japanese instruments. And I was coming to kind of study with him and go to a festival that he was having some pieces performed at. And I was staying with this family. Sana's brother, who I know as Kachan, would come over and visit sometimes. And there was one night where we went to one of Kachan's friends' houses, and there was a woman there from the Bay Area, and she knew you, and I was from the Bay Area, and we got in contact, and you gave me a bunch of Japanese music, and I think we had like pizza somewhere.
Yeah, we went to the cafe next to the university, sort of around up the street from where I used to live.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kacang, yeah. Oh, Kacang, I've known for years.
Oh, wow.
Melissa, the woman you met, her husband is his best friend, and so
That's
we've.
right.
I mean, I can't say that I know Kacang well, but I met Kacang through Melissa and her husband.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Oh
It's
my God.
fascinating. Fascinating. Talk to me a little about the housing situation that you found yourself in.
Oh God. Yeah. I think did we discuss this once before?
We did. I just want to hear you tell it again.
Oh man. I think probably, as most people know, the population of Japan has been dropping,
Mhm.
and seriously for the last 20, maybe even 30 years, ever since the economic bubble. Because of that, neighborhoods are beginning to empty, and there's nobody who can live in the house. The family has died out. For example, I have a second house, and that second house is the first one I got. But the house was basically, it was, do you want it? It was a gift. True, the house is in the middle of nowhere. It's
Sure.
in the country, but it's great. And makes it even more wonderful is there's a studio on the property. I mean,
Mm,
for a musician or a composer, I mean, it's ideal. There's the main house, which is big. Well, maybe not by American standards or Australian standards, but it's
sure.
big. It's comfortable. There's plenty of space.
Yeah.
And the studio is nice. It's bright. One wall is nothing but sliding glass doors that overlooks this small valley.
Mm,
And,
beautiful.
and I'm in the midst of having the studio remodeled. I mean, not, I don't even know if remodeled is, that might be excessive, but there's a back wall. I'm having bookshelves put in. I mean, it really is. If you want peace, if you want quiet, it's the place to go. I paid for the legal fees. I mean, which was maybe 2,000, 3,000. And then just as a token gesture of my gratitude, I gave her another. She said, "Oh, well, 2,000." Like, okay, don't look a gift, look a gift horse in the mouth, sort of thing.
Or a gift house. Yeah.
Yeah, or a gift house in the attic. This house, I'm going to say maybe 1,000 square feet. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I'm not the best at that kind of conversion.
uh, don't ask me. Maybe not quite 1,000. It's if you were to walk to the CBD, the downtown from the house. If you take a leisurely walk, it's 30 minutes. If you get onto the tube, onto the subway, 2 stops. Up in the hills, surrounded by green. Behind the house, there's a mountain that belongs to the city and is not developed. I'm at the end of it is a dead-end street. So, the cats can go outside. I'm not too worried about them being.
Nice.
The house has some problems, fair enough. It's old. But if this were in Melbourne or San Francisco, I should think it would be about $1 million.
Yeah.
Easily. And it cost me 180,000 US.
Crazy. In Kyoto.
In Kyoto, yeah. It's the sort of thing where it's like, it's mad.
Yeah.
But that's what it's like. You can get, for example, at this house in the country, a neighbor, I ran into one of the neighbors the other day, and she has a 300-year-old farmhouse, and she says, "Well, I'll sell this to you for whatever amount you offer.
Wow.
$100, it's yours. $200, it's yours." It's beautiful. I mean, It's truly stunning. I mean, it needs work, like any 300-year-old house would.
Sure. It's a fixer-upper, maybe.
Yeah, but it's the sort of thing, where if I had lots of money, I'd buy it just because it would be so much fun to fix it up.
Yeah.
I mean, the skeleton, or what do you call it? The bones of the house are beautiful. It needs you need to sort of even out the foundation, and things have settled with the passage of time, which is, if you know traditional Japanese architecture, it's quite common to do. You just lift up the floorboards, and it's this, what do they call it? Stump and post construction. The carpenters have this way of evening things out by working with the actual posts. Yeah, it's really remarkable. And I would like to do that with this house, but maybe not now.
Sure.
I really would like to do it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
A bit more than I can afford at the moment.
Sure. Yeah. That's nuts.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it really is. And the property taxes for this the house here in the city, $500 a year.
Man.
When I hear what my sister pays in property taxes, she lives just outside of Los Angeles.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, it's like, and then for the house in the country, getting back to that house in the country, when I thought I was just getting a house.
Yeah.
But I got a total of 13 title deeds.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I've got all of these bits of property, and I don't know where the fuck they are out there.
Have to hunt for them somewhere.
Well, I need to go to I don't even know where one goes to. It's like, supposedly I own this property. Where is it?
Yeah.
But I've been told I have, a couple acres on a mountain here, some fields there, and some other properties here. And it's like, oh, okay. And I think the property taxes for that are just about the same, $500 a year. All, 13 parcels or whatever it is I've got.
Wow.
And it's like, okay, well, I think that maybe staying in Japan is a good idea.
Maybe. Yeah, that might work out. I don't want to talk about COVID too much in these vids, in these little interviews with people. It comes up somewhat naturally because it's,
And here we are on Zoom.
Here we are. Yeah. So I was kind of wondering about kind of the current situation in Japan. And I know, at least on this end in New York, there are some things kind of opening up and some people are starting to perform again, but it's still kind of a weird gray area where a lot of people don't feel safe going out and don't feel safe performing. I was wondering kind of what the performance situation for you might be in the near future.
Performances have come back.
Mm. You
It's
say that
still,
very slowly.
yeah, it's still not full swing.
Mm-hmm.
There was a second state of emergency that began. Hang on, shh,
We got another cat there.
yes, and he wants his mid-morning snack. A second state of emergency was announced in December, January, February, and in this part of Japan, it was closed, stopped, brought to an end, concluded. If you go out, the city is it's more or less normal.
Hmm.
Everybody still wears masks, which in Japan, however, it's just common sense.
Yeah.
Really, it's very, very different than in the States. If you have a cold, you can go out, but you just put on a mask. I mean,
Yeah.
the idea is that why would you go about infecting other people? You know, it's just seen as it's like
Yeah.
how selfish can you get?
Seems pretty sensible.
With the emergency status, everything was closed. For example, I think restaurants had limited seating and they also had to close at 8 o'clock, was it? Now that the restrictions have been lifted, restaurants are open, but it still may be limited seating. And many of the restaurants now have partitions, you know,
Oh,
plastic
sure.
partitions. Yeah. In Kyoto, they still have five, I don't know what you would call them in English. There are parts of town that are devoted to the geisha.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't know what you would call them in English, really.
But it's kind of more
Yeah,
the entertainment parts of town.
yeah, but it's the traditional
Mm,
form of entertainment. The dodgy parts of town tend to be one street over. They are still really struggling.
mm.
You know, I was talking, there's a good friend of mine who's actually a geisha, and she said, well, we make our livings off of selling dreams.
Mm.
And, you know, it's fair enough. You know, what they do is it's quite magical. It's really extraordinary. But you need customers. Without the customer base and to provide them with that much needed income, it's been very, very difficult.
You may not know the answer to this, but in terms of geisha and keiko, is that something more sought out by tourists to Kyoto, or something that, Japanese people living in Kyoto would, treat themselves to every once in a while?
I think it's a combination of both.
Mm.
The tourists, of course, want to see them. You know, they have this sort of vision of the exotic East, if you will,
Sure, certainly.
and they're extraordinary to look at. I mean,
Mm.
they're stunning when they're in full regalia. I mean, it's remarkable. And what's interesting is that the people who now want to enter that world also see it as a form of exotic nostalgia. You know, Japanese. So
Mm.
people who are born and raised in Japan, they want to do it because they see it as something beautiful.
Sure.
And indeed it is. It's not an easy life. You can have boyfriends and lovers and whatnot, but if you get married, then you retire.
Mm.
You can't be married and continue in this profession. You can have children, but if you're married,
Interesting.
something about marriage, the I believe is all right. If you're married, you now have a full-time job. You do not have time to be a geisha anymore.
Mm.
That you have responsibilities towards running your home. Japan is still quite sexist in some ways.
Sure.
Um, Marriage is seen as well. It's a job. If you want to have a well-run home, it's work, and there's nothing wrong with it. So yeah, it's for them. It's been really, really, really challenging. But the exotic aspect, even the Japanese see it as exotic. This kind of nostalgic. This is what Japan once was.
Sure.
Kyoto people, yeah, sure. Sometimes you do. As you know, it's fun, and women are, of course, are welcome. It's the Western or the non-Japanese tend to see it as, this glorified form of prostitution. It's not.
Sure.
If you want that sort of relationship, you can certainly do it,
Hmm.
but it's like establishing any sort of physical relationship with anybody. You have to be prepared to make that sort of sacrifice.
Yeah.
And it's expensive.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into it. I've watched videos about just not even just like the actual entertainment, but just all the preparation that goes into
Yeah.
being a geisha and being able
Yeah.
to serve that particular fantasy or that dream.
But it's worth it. It's fun. Everybody should experience it at least once.
Yeah. Yeah, there are quite a few things that I wasn't able to get to during my, I mean, it was only like 10 days, I think it was there. So there's still places I'd like to go see and things I'd like to do. My mom taught English in Japan.
Oh, really? I
And
didn't know that.
yeah, and likely had something to do with the Japanese foreign exchange student she had when she was growing up.
That's how it came about.
Yeah,
Right?
so she became interested in Japan and taught there and lived there for a little while. And so as I grew up, she kind of instilled in me a love for Japanese cuisine, Japanese culture. And in college is when I really got into especially Heian Japanese culture. I mean, some people may call me a weeaboo or a weeb or what have you. People who are like really obsessed with anime in particular and manga.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I try to defend myself a little bit. It was like, I'm not really, that's not how I got into it. I got into it through like the poetry books, Tale of Genji, and just the art from that time. And so that my tendency is when I come to Japan, I'd love to go to Nara when I'm there next time to see the
You haven't seen it.
old capital. Yeah.
Oh, dude, you need to see that.
Yes. So there are a number of places like that and like, geisha and things like that that I'd love to experience just because I didn't have the time
Oh,
last time.
yeah. Yeah, well, the next time you're back, we'll make sure that happens. Yeah, it's interesting. When I was an exchange student, the reasons that people were coming to Japan were like, I think the two of us, people were interested in classical culture, the Heian period, the great temples, Zen Buddhism, tea ceremony, the arts.
Yeah.
And some people were equally interested in the crafts, like Melissa. She was interested in the textiles and weaving.
Cool.
And oh yeah, well the Japanese textiles are they're unbelievable.
Yeah.
But the population that now is coming to Japan, they are here for anime. They are here for manga, pop culture, which is so different from my generation.
Sure.
I have to admit, it was one of those moments where you think, oh God, so this is what it means when they say generation gap. I'm always amazed at the impact anime has had in the United States and Australia as well. There was a period when my nephews were probably just about your age. If I didn't go home with a suitcase filled with Pokemon goods, I was just like, well, you can bugger off.
Yeah, you might as well not come home. Like, what are you doing?
Why are you here? Where's our loot?
Yeah.
Which I thought was very endearing, but at the same time, it's like, what did they do with all that stuff? And I think the next one where I had to come back with odds and ends, Yu-Gi-Oh.
That's another big one. I got into the trading cards with both of those. I
They,
started out with Pokemon and some of the video games, and then Yu-Gi-Oh was a big thing. It's gambling for children. Looking back on it, I'm like, I wonder how much money. Let's not think about that. I'd rather not think how much allowance I spent on those things. Artistically, I was really into monsters. And from the age of 5, I would like draw monsters and things with like 13 eyes and a bunch of arms and stuff. And so I kind of got into Pokemon and anime from kind of the artistic direction, especially Yu-Gi-Oh, because those are the art is just so highly detailed. And so I was like telling myself, well, I'm doing it for the art, but eventually became like, oh, I need to stop. This is an addiction.
So how did you end up getting into music after drawing monsters?
Oh, well, I guess I started out doing a lot of visual art when I was younger. So I'd draw a bunch of monsters, and then I'd draw like comic books with different characters that I would come up with. And then by the time I was 8, I started taking piano lessons. And that just kind of kept going, and that became more and more serious. And then I took violin lessons as well. Yeah, at a certain point, music just kind of took over, and I cooled my jets a little bit. I always did a little bit of both in middle school and part of high school. But music became like, oh, this is the thing I want to do. And visual art kind of petered out a little bit. I still sometimes draw every once in a while, but I have to kind of remind myself to do it. It's not something that
Yeah.
comes naturally anymore.
Oh, interesting. Well, good on you.
Well, Philip, it's been lovely talking to you for this little chit chat interview. You can listen to his lovely shamisen playing on Austin on my album when it comes out on April 30th. Thank you so much for talking to me.
My pleasure. And there's our happy kitty bidding you
Aw.
goodbye, I suppose.
Bye, kitty.